The road had always been a comfort to Matthew. Long drives at night gave him clarity, the hum of the engine drowning out his thoughts. The empty highways offering a kind of peace he never found anywhere else. But that night, peace was the last thing waiting for him. He had been driving back from visiting a friend across state lines, cutting through stretches of farmland and wooded backroads. It was close to midnight when the GPS on his dashboard flickered, briefly losing signal. The map glitched, then rerouted, displaying a new path marked by a set of green highway signs he hadn't noticed before. They looked perfectly ordinary, reflective in the glow of his headlights, pointing toward an alternate route that promised to shave 30 minutes off his drive. Exhausted, he followed without thinking twice. The asphalt beneath his tires felt newer, smoother, almost too perfect compared to the cracked country road he had just left behind. The air around him seemed heavy, thicker somehow, and the silence pressed in once he turned onto the unfamiliar stretch. There were no other cars, no distant farmhouses with porch lights burning, no flicker of a cell tower in the distance. Just the trees closing in on either side of the road, tall and skeletal, their branches knotting together overhead like ribs forming a cage. The signs continued, spaced evenly along the highway, but the names on them grew strange the farther he drove. At first, they marked places he didn't recognize, small towns with unfamiliar names. Then the lettering began to blur, the words twisting into jumbled symbols that didn't seem to belong to any language. When his headlights passed over one of the signs, he swore the letters rearranged themselves into his own name. Matthew told himself it was his exhaustion playing tricks on him. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, keeping his eyes forward. The digital clock on his dashboard had frozen at 12:17. The radio, though he hadn't touched it, whispered static that sometimes rose into a faint voice before sinking back down again, past another sign. The reflective paint was peeling this time, but when the light hit it just right, he caught a glimpse of something scratched into the metal. A set of tally marks, uneven and desperate, like someone had carved them with their fingernails. The uneasy weight in his chest deepened. He thought about turning back, but when he checked the rearview mirror, the road behind him was gone. The lane stretched only into darkness. No signs, no painted lines, just an endless void. His headlights caught nothing but black. He tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but when he pressed harder on the gas, the car didn't respond. The speedometer needle sat frozen at 40 no matter how much he pushed. The highway stretched on, impossibly long, impossibly straight. Every so often, a new sign appeared, each one more weathered than the last. Some were bent, some rusted through, and one hung by only a single bolt, swaying in a wind he could not feel. Each sign marked the distance to an exit. But when the mile markers counted down to 0, there was no off-ramp. It's just more road. Then came the smell, faint at first, then choking. It wasn't the earthy scent of woods or farmland. It was sharp, metallic, like rust mixed with decay. He rolled his window up, but the stench lingered inside the car. His eyes watered. In the rearview mirror, shapes shifted in the back seat. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, pulling themselves across the leather like something was sitting there, just out of sight. He refused to look directly, his pulse hammering. The signs changed again. It's no longer mile markers, but warnings. The letters, though cracked and faded, were unmistakable. Do not stop, keep driving, it follows. His throat went dry. The signs weren't directions anymore. They were commands. He glanced at his fuel gauge. Full when he started, it now sat just above empty. His hands shook as he tightened his grip on the wheel. He hadn't been driving long enough for the tank to drain. He tried his phone, but the screen refused to unlock. The wallpaper flickered into an image of the same road he was on, the same trees, the same darkness, but from an angle behind him, as if someone was watching his car from the rear. The next sign loomed larger than the rest, its metal twisted and buckling as though it had been struck repeatedly. Across its surface, smeared in what looked like dried, blackened stains, were words etched deep enough to warp the metal. Turn back, but there was no way back. The rear view still reflected nothing but empty black. Faint light appeared ahead, barely visible through the trees. Relief flooded him, but as he neared, it curdled into dread. It wasn't the glow of a town or an exit. It was a single street lamp, flickering weakly, standing over an abandoned car pulled to the shoulder. Its doors hung open, the windows were shattered inward, glass littering the pavement. He slowed as he passed, and for a split second, he thought he saw figures inside the vehicle. Twisted, hunched silhouettes that seemed frozen mid-scream. The road pressed him onward. More abandoned cars appeared, scattered along the shoulder. Some burned-out shells, others so pristine they looked brand new, their headlights still faintly glowing, though there was no engine running. Each one had the same thing in common. They were empty. The signs came faster now, closer together, screaming warnings in warped lettering. It sees you, do not leave the road. Almost there. He felt a pressure in his chest, as though something enormous was leaning down, watching through the trees. The streetlights ahead stretched into the distance now, a line of weak beacons pulling him forward. They led to something in the distance, a vast shape forming at the edge of his headlights. His foot trembled against the gas. His gut screamed at him to stop, but the wheel jerked on its own, guiding him straight ahead. The shape revealed itself slowly, a massive green highway sign, larger than any he had ever seen. It towered over the road, rust streaking down its metal frame. Across its surface, in letters taller than him, was his name. Not just his first name, but his full name, date of birth, and something else beneath it. A date 3 days in the future. His stomach dropped. He slammed the brakes. But the car would not stop. The road carried him forward, inexorable, until the sign loomed directly above. The radio crackled sharply, the static rising into a scream that rattled the speakers. For the first time since entering, the clock on the dashboard moved, clicking over to 12:18, and then everything went black. When Matthew's eyes opened, daylight streamed through the windshield. He was parked on the shoulder of a familiar country road, the one he had started on. His car engine was cold, the fuel gauge full again, his phone showing no missed calls or messages. The GPS displayed his route home, as if nothing had happened, but his hands would not stop trembling. His dashboard clock was still frozen at 12:18, and taped to his steering wheel was a strip of reflective green metal. Bent and sharp at the edges, the letters etched deep into its surface. His name and the date 3 days from now. Route 47 was the kind of road people only drove when they had no other choice. It stretched across the countryside like a scar, 2 narrow lanes cutting through endless miles of empty fields and forgotten farmhouses. Travelers knew it for its silence. No gas stations, no rest stops, no towns. Just the occasional boarded-up barn or rusted sign that hadn't been replaced in decades. Ethan had taken the road late one Friday night, hoping to cut time off his return from a work trip. His co-workers warned him against it, saying Route 47 had a reputation. Locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed. But Ethan dismissed their stories as small-town superstition. He wanted the fastest way home, and the GPS marked the highway as a straight shot. For the first hour, the drive was uneventful. His headlights carved through the darkness, revealing nothing but endless pavement ahead. The air was heavy, almost too still, and his radio caught only static no matter which station he tried. Midnight passed, and exhaustion began to weigh on him. His eyelids felt heavy, his thoughts sluggish, until the shape appeared. On the right shoulder, illuminated by the sweep of his headlights, a man stood with his thumb out. He was dressed strangely for the weather, an old gray coat buttoned high, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. Ethan slowed instinctively. Hitchhikers weren't common on highways anymore, especially not at this hour. And something about leaving a man alone on that desolate road gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, he pulled over. The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat without a word. His movements were stiff, deliberate, as if every step took effort. Up close, his clothes looked older than they had from the road. Worn fabric frayed at the edges, the style outdated by decades. The brim of his hat hid most of his face, but his skin was pale, almost gray in the glow of the dashboard. He carried no bag, no belongings. Ethan tried to ease the silence, asking where the man was headed. But the hitchhiker's response was little more than a low murmur. He gave the name of a town Ethan didn't recognize, one that didn't appear on his GPS. Still, the road stretched endlessly ahead, so Ethan figured he would know when to stop. The drive resumed in silence. The man sat perfectly still, his hat tilted downward, his hands folded neatly in his lap. At times, Ethan glanced sideways, trying to make out his expression. But the shadows never seemed to lift from the man's face. The longer they drove, the colder the air in the car became. Ethan turned the heater up, but it made no difference. His breath began to fog the windshield. The hitchhiker shifted only once, lifting his head slightly as they passed an abandoned farmhouse with broken windows. For a moment, Ethan thought the man's eyes caught the reflection of the headlights. They glowed faintly, not with color, but with a dull, glassy sheen, like wet stone. Miles passed, though Ethan couldn't say how many. His phone battery drained to 0, despite being fully charged when he left. And the dashboard clock froze at 1:11. The silence pressed heavier, broken only by the steady hum of the tires on the asphalt. At last, the hitchhiker lifted his head and muttered something soft. He gestured vaguely to the right, toward a dirt path that branched off into the darkness. Ethan slowed and turned, though every nerve in his body urged him not to. The path was narrow, the trees overhead thick and suffocating. His headlights barely penetrated the shadows, but after a short distance, the hitchhiker raised his hand again, signaling to stop. Ethan pulled over. The man opened the passenger door and stepped out. His movements were slower now, as if his body resisted each gesture. He walked into the tree line without looking back, his coat brushing against the branches as he disappeared into the dark. Ethan waited for him to vanish completely before exhaling. Relief washed over him. He'd done his good deed, strange as it felt. He shifted the car into drive, but before pulling away, his eyes caught the passenger seat. Something rested there, an object the hitchhiker had left behind. It was an old leather-bound book, cracked with age, its cover marked with symbols Ethan didn't recognize. The leather was damp to the touch, cold as if it had been pulled from water. He flipped it open, and his stomach tightened. Every page was filled with names, handwritten in neat, slanted script. Some were crossed out with a heavy black line, others circled. Near the bottom of the last page, his own name was written. The ink was fresh, his chest constricted. He slammed the book shut and tossed it into the back seat. But when he glanced into the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. The hitchhiker was sitting in the back, his hat tilted forward, his gray hands folded neatly on top of the book. Ethan whipped around in panic, but the seat was empty. The book, however, still lay there, its pages rustling faintly, though the air in the car was still. The temperature dropped again, his breath fogging so thick it felt like smoke. He stomped on the gas, desperate to put distance between himself and that dirt road. The highway stretched on endlessly. No matter how fast he drove, the odometer barely climbed. He passed the same landmarks repeatedly: the broken farmhouse, the collapsed barn, the leaning telephone pole. Time lost meaning. His eyes grew heavy with fatigue, though adrenaline screamed in his veins. At one point, he blinked, and for a split second, the hitchhiker sat in the passenger seat again, his hat lifting just enough to reveal a hollow grin carved into gray skin. When Ethan blinked again, the seat was empty. By the time he saw the highway sign for his hometown, dawn was breaking. He pulled into his driveway with trembling hands, his body numb with exhaustion. The car engine ticked as it cooled, the silence of morning pressing in. For a brief moment, he convinced himself it had all been a hallucination brought on by fatigue. When he opened the passenger door, the old book slid onto the pavement. Now the pages flipped open in the breeze, stopping at his name. Cited, a new date had appeared in fresh ink. 1 week from that day. Ethan tried to destroy it, burned the book in his fire pit, watching the leather curl and blacken. God, the smoke stung his lungs, bitter and foul. By morning, the ashes were gone. The book had returned to the passenger seat of his car, untouched, waiting. Now, every night, Ethan dreams of Route 47. In his dreams, the hitchhiker waits on the shoulder, hat tilted low, thumb extended. Sometimes Ethan sees himself pull over again. Sometimes he sees the hitchhiker already in the car. And sometimes he wakes to find damp footprints leading from his front door to his bedroom. The gas station sat alone at the edge of the highway, its flickering neon sign barely clinging to life against the black stretch of farmland. Ryan pulled in just past midnight, low on fuel after a long drive through unfamiliar back roads. The place felt strange from the moment he stepped out of his car. The air carried the heavy stillness of a place forgotten. and the silence was broken only by the buzzing of an old light above the door. Inside, the station looked untouched by time. Dust clung to the shelves of faded snack wrappers and cracked soda bottles. An old fan spun lazily in the corner, though no air stirred. The cashier sat behind the counter, an older man with hollow eyes and skin lined like worn leather. His presence seemed to still, as though he had been waiting specifically for Ryan to arrive. Ryan mentioned the town where he was headed, a small place he'd found marked on his GPS. He said he wanted directions, since his phone had lost service 20 miles back. The attendant's eyes flicked sharply at the name, his expression tightening into something unreadable. Then, with a voice flat and cold, he told Ryan that the town didn't exist. It wasn't on maps. It wasn't supposed to be there. And if Ryan had seen it listed on his GPS, it meant something had already noticed him. A chill crept into Ryan's spine. But before he could question further, the lights inside the station flickered violently. The cashier's face seemed to stretch in the flashing glow, the lines of age deepening into something skeletal. When the power steadied, the man told Ryan to leave while he still could. Confused and unsettled, Ryan paid for gas and drove back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, featureless, swallowed by the dark. He told himself the attendant was just another eccentric loner, the kind that Backroad gas stations seemed to collect. Still, his curiosity gnawed at him. If the town didn't exist, then what had he seen on the GPS? The sign appeared an hour later. A green highway marker, reflective in the beam of his headlights, with the town's name printed clearly. The distance listed was only 3 miles. Ryan slowed, his heart thudding. Something in him said to keep driving, to ignore it and head straight for the interstate. But curiosity, sharper now than caution, pushed him to turn. The road narrowed quickly, the trees closing in on either side like walls. Fog rolled low across the pavement, swirling in his headlights. The GPS, though his phone still showed no service, continued to track his location, the small arrow pulsing closer to the center of the town. Then the houses appeared. At first just faint shapes in the fog, weather-beaten porches, broken fences, windows black and hollow. The streets were deserted, no cars, no lights, no movement, only row after row of homes left to decay. Yet something about them felt lived in, as though the air itself carried the memory of people who had only just left. At the center of town, Ryan stopped in front of a church. Its steeple leaned at an unnatural angle, the wooden boards warped and splintered. The front doors were chained shut, though a faint glow spilled from the cracks, pale and sickly, pulsing as though it were alive. He felt drawn to it, but before he could step out, movement caught his eye. A figure stood at the corner of the street. A man, dressed in clothing decades out of place, suspenders, a wide hat, boots caked with mud. His head tilted slowly as Ryan's headlights caught him, his face pale and expressionless. Then another figure appeared beside him, and another. Soon the fog seemed to breathe them out, silhouettes forming from the haze, until dozens stood along the street, all facing him, all still. Ryan's chest tightened as he fumbled the gear shift. The figures didn't move, but their heads turned in unison as his car rolled backward. Every shadowed face locked onto him, unmoving, unblinking. He pressed harder on the gas, the car crawling away inch by inch. The road back to the highway twisted in ways it hadn't before. Turns appeared where there hadn't been any, leading him deeper into streets lined with empty houses. His GPS spun wildly, the arrow circling itself, always pulling him back toward the church. The fog grew denser, wrapping around his car until the headlights lit only a wall of white. Panic clawed at him. He drove blind, his hands slick on the wheel until suddenly the fog parted. He was back at the church. The chained doors groaned, rattling as though something inside pressed against them. The glow from within brightened, spilling through the cracks, illuminating the faces of the figures that now surrounded his car. They stood in silence, closer than before, their features clearer. Their eyes were hollow sockets, their mouths stitched shut with dark thread. Some looked fresh, their skin tight and pale, while others sagged and withered as though drained by time. They leaned toward the car, their hands lifting in unison, palms pressed flat against the glass. The cold seeped through instantly, frosting the windows. Ryan floored the accelerator. The car lurched forward, slamming through the crowd, though the figures didn't resist. They crumbled into fog at the touch, only to reform in the mirrors, their heads twisting unnaturally to follow. The chains on the church doors snapped, and with a deafening crack, the doors burst open. Inside, the glow was no light at all, but a void, darker than night, pulling at everything with a gravity Ryan could feel in his chest. The figures began to move now, stepping toward it, dissolving into nothing as they crossed the threshold. A sound rose from within, not a scream, not a voice, but the echo of countless whispers layered together, beckoning. Ryan tore his eyes away, forcing the car down a side street. He drove without direction, the fog shifting and folding around him, streets looping back on themselves. He screamed inside his head for escape, for any break in the endless maze, and then, without warning, the fog broke. He was back on the highway. The sudden clarity nearly made him lose control of the car. The trees looked normal again, the pavement stretching smooth beneath his tires. Behind him, the road was empty, the town gone as though it had never been. His GPS showed nothing but a blank stretch of highway. By dawn, Ryan reached the next real town. The streets were alive with people, the gas stations buzzing with morning traffic, but he felt detached, as though the world had shifted sideways. He stopped to fuel again, his hands trembling as he stepped into the store. The cashier, a young woman, smiled politely and asked where he had come from. When he gave her the town's name, her face drained of color. She told him no such place existed. She told him no one had lived there for 50 years. Not since the night the whole population had vanished without a trace. Ryan didn't argue. He only nodded, paid, and drove away, the memory of stitched mouths and hollow eyes etched deep into his mind. But as he glanced into his rearview mirror, the fog began to curl once more along the shoulder of the road. And he knew, even if the town didn't exist, it was waiting for him to come back.